Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Astronautalis. I'm a rapper from Minneapolis, Minnesota. All the cool kids in the north wishing they were southern. So they wear boots and drink whiskey, just like Waylon. All the cool kids in the heart of Dixie try to shake their accent before they move to Brooklyn.
Sometimes it's great to be stupid. I mean, because ultimately you do things that, like, if I was well informed, I would have been too cool to do a lot of the things I ended up doing. When I was growing up in Jacksonville, literally I had to go to like alleys and train yards and abandoned buildings to battle dudes. And I am the most like suburban middle class, least thuggin' dude out there. But I would just go to these places because I wanted to rap and completely unaware that this might be dangerous. And like, it wasn't until later when like a dude tried to pull a gun on me and guys would try to beat me up, like, that I realized like, oh, I might be in a bad place. But it never dawned on me because I was stupid. And so it was good that I was stupid because I wouldn't have gone to those places if I was smart. If I was smart, I would have been like, this is a terrible idea to go into that dark building and battle all of those old men. Like, but instead I did it anyway because I was an idiot and I just like rap music. And so I'm glad I was dumb. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't that stupid.
You have a pretty crazy life.
I think it's crazy of my own making, so that's sort of a different thing. I've sort of thrown myself into crazy.
Do you have any crazy show stories or like any crazy fan thing that has happened to you when you played live?
Probably the craziest show story is the metal plate in my head.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a little scar right here. It's pretty faint now because it's pretty old. It's from, it's 12 years old. It's 12 years old. Jesus. 12 years ago, I was on stage at the Warped Tour in Minneapolis before I lived in Minneapolis, and I was on stage with the group Atmosphere. And on Warped Tour, though they're a punk tour, they have all these like liabilities. You can't jump from this crowd into the stage like a regular stage dive. You have to jump down from the stage to the security barrier. And I jumped down the security barrier, and I grabbed the security barrier with both hands, and I put my right foot on the step and my left foot on the concrete. It was a really hot summer day, so they've been spraying everybody with squirt guns and hoses, and so my hands grab the rail just fine, and then my feet just go out from under me like this, and my head just goes clack. And I hit so hard that it bounced me back up onto my feet. And I hit so hard that it severed the nerve in my forehead, so I didn't feel anything. But I thought, well, I'm probably gonna have a huge like goose egg on my head, so I'm not gonna not stage dive. And so I dove into the crowd anyway. And it's an Atmosphere crowd, you know, like in 2004, so it's just a bunch of like teenage girls in the front row. And I dive into the crowd and I land on top of this like pile of teenage girls, like crowd surfing, and my head is just fountaining blood at this point, like just splurting out like Carrie on prom night or something, and just like covering people in my blood. And moving me to the front. And I look at the crowd, and there's literally a girl that's like covered in my blood. And I just go, sorry.
Teenage girls definitely would not.
Yeah, they were not.
That.
This is not the plan that they signed up for, to have some stupid ass white boy they'd never seen spray blood all over him. And I reached up and touched my own skull at that point, and then got it taped up, walked to the hospital. They were about to stitch it up, and they realized that there was a bump in my skull. Ran a CT scan, realized I had fractured my skull, and I have a titanium plate with 2 metal screws in there.
Wow.
So that's probably the craziest one, I think.
Yeah, I think that will suffice.
Does that count? Will that too? Does that count for crazy? Cool.
Fuck this, off to live my own life. What would you do for some freedom and a Klondike? I'm fucking so from now on I am all my all news is bad news. Everything is out right your way. Okay, I'll put up your way. Put up your way. Okay, I'll put up your way. Put up your way. Okay, I'll put up your way. They said put up your way. I said
I came up as a battle rapper. Before I ever wrote songs or anything, all I did was freestyle and battle. For the first like 4 to 6 years or so, I didn't really write anything down. For the longest time, it was about being clever and being precise and just being, you know, kind of on point.
Did it just come naturally to you, or?
No, not at all. And I was as bad as every white kid that ever tried to rap. And I didn't tell anybody for the first 2 years, and I would like freestyle while I walked my dog, and I had a job in a pizza parlor at washing dishes, and so you just stare at a tile wall for hours. And I would just stare at the wall and just freestyle. And I would sit on the bus and I would freestyle. I didn't have a lot of friends, and so I had a lot of time to freestyle to myself. I think the core of it is that I was an idiot, like a suburban middle-class idiot who had no idea about rap culture and was sort of learning about it just, you know, kind of through his osmosis. And so I would listen to dudes like Lord Finesse and Big L and all these like kind of New York City legends, and I heard that they were good freestyle rappers, and I, being a suburban middle-class white idiot, thought that their albums were freestyle, and that's what freestyle was supposed to sound like. So I set this impossibly high bar that my freestyles needed to sound like Lord Finesse's writtens. And so for the first 2 years, I was just punishing myself if I didn't sound like perfect Big L lyrics when I was freestyling. And it wasn't until like maybe about a year and a half into that I realized, like, oh, no, those aren't freestyles. And so part of, like teenage loneliness, a lot of boredom, and then having an impossibly high standard kind of ended me up where I am today.
You mentioned several times being a suburban middle-class white boy.
Yeah.
So you've lived in lots of places, Florida, Seattle, you live in Minneapolis now.
Texas as well. I was
Texas.
born in Virginia, and I grew up in Maryland until I was 12, so that's the run right there.
Okay. I feel like most artists today that you hear about are like from Los Angeles or New York, like very big concentrated areas. How do you think it has affected you moving around to like smaller, like Florida, you said there wasn't like a huge rap scene there?
Well, I left Florida because there wasn't a scene, and I moved to Texas to go to school. And Dallas was like a really good place for me to start off, but at the end of the day, it was also sort of kind of a wobbly music scene there. I moved back to Florida because I couldn't afford to live anywhere for the first few years, so I moved into my parents' house because touring, you live off of ramen and you sleep in a car. And then eventually, I moved to Seattle for a girl, which was a terrible idea at the time, but eventually became a good idea in the end. And I moved to Minneapolis. When I was leaving Seattle, I was looking at all these different places, and I was looking at Austin, Texas, and I was looking at Berlin and Prague and New Orleans and Minneapolis, and I chose Minneapolis. And honestly, it's in my opinion, it's the best place in America to be a musician. It's probably the best music scene in America because of the support of the city, the support of the community, the support of the press there, the support of the clubs. But then also on top of it, I don't have to work 10 jobs to have a 150 square foot bedroom in an apartment. I have a nice little place. I make a living off of rap music, and so ultimately I go other places. I don't make my living just in Los Angeles or New York. I make my living in Prague and Moscow and all over the place. So it doesn't really matter where I live as long as I got an international airport. And so I think that's a thing that is often overlooked by musicians. There's still this sort of mythology that you have to go to New York or LA to make it. And at the end of the day, most musicians I know didn't make it in New York and LA. They made it on SoundCloud, and so it doesn't really matter where you are. It matters what you do. And, so I ended up there, and I don't see myself ever leaving. It's nice to be in New York every once in a while.
Did you put a lot of your music on the internet? Is that how you made a lot of your fans?
Yeah, I wouldn't have a fan base if it wasn't for file sharing. I started into making music and started putting music out on the internet in 2003. And this is, sort of as Napster was waning and other things were building. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have fans. I didn't sell records, because it didn't have fans. And so ultimately, the idea of piracy has always been a beneficial thing to me. And at the end of the day, even now that I rely on record sales and I hope for record sales, I would rather someone pirate my record than not hear my record at all. Because at the end of the day, I think that I make good enough records that people will want to buy them anyway. And I put on a good enough show that people will want to come anyway. And I think it's just, it's changed the dynamic at this point where you have to make good music. You can't trick people into buying your record anymore. And so, yeah, my records have been online before really they were anywhere. And I owe a lot of my career to that.
How do you kind of find what kind of sound you're going for?
It differs from record to record, and it really comes down to what I want to say in that record. And then there's also an element of just sort of aesthetic value, what I'm into at the time. For the last few records, they've been these sort of really lush and layered records that pile on strings. There's layers of guitar. They build into sort of kind of giant crescendos. And so for this record, I really wanted something much more pared down. I started to look to the music of my youth, which is Southern rap music, was all around me growing up. I was living in Florida and living in Texas. I lived in Florida right around Florida's sort of explosion with Trick Daddy and Slip and Slide Records. And I moved to Texas right around Houston. Really, it's having its big wave with all of Paul Wall and Devin the Dude and people like that. And that music is really sparse and Spartan, and I wanted to kind of take that approach to a thing, but put my own kind of a style on it. And so instead of using synth horns, I'm using a full horn section. Primarily the music is synthesizer based and samples and electronic drums, and then just a big brass band. And so you kind of just draw on what you know. You draw on what direction you want to take with a thing, and at the end of the day, you also just want it to sound fucking dope. And so it has to knock, at the end of the day, all concepts aside, it still has to knock.
Your latest album, Cut the Body Loose. Do you want to talk to us about, the recording process of that and how you wrote it?
Sure. I wrote it over a lot of years. Sometimes my process for writing is really slow, and I wrote it mostly on the road, and I wrote a lot of it about things that I knew from my childhood and my life in the American South, mixed with things that I had sort of seen in my travels. The term cut the body loose, I think, is sort of pretty crucial to the whole thing. It's a phrase taken from the ritual of a New Orleans jazz funeral. The funeral's done, the body is taken out in the casket by the pallbearers, and the funeral procession is met by the band. The band plays these tremendously sad funeral dirges. And once they reach the gates of the graveyard, this is the moment when you cut the body loose. And the casket and the pallbearers and the body all go to the graveyard, and the funeral party and the band then goes on down the street. The music changes, and it's a party down the street, and there's this moment. I think it's a really beautiful moment in sort of like a ritual of grief to decide that, okay, now we're done. Now we're done crying. Now we're done being sad. And now we all fucking party with a bunch of strangers in the middle of the streets in New Orleans. And that was such a really beautiful thing to learn about to understand, and especially given, I think, the era that we live in and the world that we're exposed to repeatedly. It's very easy to be sort of crushed under the sadness of the world around us. And so the sort of takeaway that I'd had from the last few years of traveling, seeing the things that I had seen all over the world, was that the thing that I had seen in common with people that were happy and people that were finding joy, even in really adverse situations, is that they just had made a determination to be happy, and they made a determination to make their lives happy. And that really connected with me and seemed like a natural sort of through line to that ritual of cutting the body loose in a New Orleans jazz funeral, sort of an allegorical representation of the whole thing. And so at the end of the day, I suppose that's the long and short of the entire record.
Wow.
There you go.
So thank you so much for coming by and playing a session for us. The amazing songs, they sounded so great.
Thanks for having me.
So
Thank you.
bad.
Nailed it. We're good. Let's go.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Astronautalis. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, by way of Jacksonville, Florida, and you're watching Baeblemusic. Boom.